The protocol droid, C-3PO, peered out the viewport of the damaged escape pod. The long night was over, and a new day was beginning. "It's getting light outside," he said, relieved. Then 3PO realized that it was time to exit the pod. Although the close quarters were cramped, he still preferred them to the perils that might lie on the unfamiliar planet. "Actually, it's not that bright yet," he added quickly. "Forget it, 3PO. I say we take off pronto." This voice rose from the padded G couch, where 12-year-old Stuart Zissou had been sleeping. Now he jumped up and began to buckle on his survival belt. Astromech droid R2D2 let out a short whistle, then beeped. "Review our situation first?" "I'd be happy to, R2, 3PO said. "We've crash-landed on a strange planet after being lost in space. The only thing we know for sure is that we're still in the Delanton system. The last message we received on the comlink was from Princess Leia, who told us to get to the nearest settlement to make contact with the rebels. We have to do it within 48 hours or we'll be stranded, because the princess has ordered the evacuation of rebel forces from all planets in the Delanton system. So we don't know where we are, where we're going, or who to contact, but we have to do it fast. In other words, we're doomed." R2 gave a long warning whistle. "I don't possibly see how I could be any more cheerful than I am," 3PO replied, "considering that I'm lost, in terrible danger, and dented to boot." "If you don't stop complaining, I'll take a boot to you," Stuart said, exasperated. "It's time for action, not whining." Everyone knew Stuart was anxious about his father. C-3PO, R2D2, and the research droid 4BX had been accompanying Governor Zissou and his young son to the planet Delanton when they'd been attacked by an Imperial warship. Governor Zissou had been captured, and the rest of them had just managed to escape in the pod. Unfortunately, the controls of the pod had malfunctioned. They had barely made it through an asteroid field before crash landing on the strange planet. They were certain that the pod had been sabotaged by a double agent back on the rebel base at Yavin 4. Luckily, they were just able to get this information to the princess before all communication had been cut off. Now, everyone," 4BX spoke up. She wheeled forward from the comber. "3PO is right. We should get moving. And R2 is right, too. It's best to review our options before we start." "I didn't say it was time to get moving," 3PO protested, waving his arms. "As a matter of fact, I think it might be best not to move at all. Maybe we should wait for the rebels to find us." Stuart ran his hands through his rumpled dark hair. "We know what we have to do," he said crisply. "We saw a city to the south as we were landing. So let's move." 4BX wheeled forward. The blue screen in her egg-shaped head flashed, then changed to a warm rose color. "Stuart, I know you're anxious to rescue your father, but the best thing we can do for him right now is be careful. If we start off in the wrong direction, we could waste precious time." Stuart's freckled face flushed. "But we're wasting time now. We've already waited 8 hours because you didn't want to travel while it was dark. And you needed rest," 4BX reminded him gently. "But now we only have 40 hours left," Stuart exclaimed anxiously. R2 rolled towards Stuart. He gave a series of beeps and whirs. "R2 doesn't want to waste any more time, either," 3PO translated. "But he thinks we should head for that river we glimpsed as we landed. It's to the east of us, so we should head in a southeasterly direction." "East?" Stuart asked in disbelief. "But that will send us off course." "R2 has a good point," 4BX said thoughtfully. "Settlements are usually built beside rivers, Stuart. It could be the most direct route." "But what about the weather?" 3PO asked worriedly. "Yesterday, the temperature dropped alarmingly. The climate might be too cold for Master Stuart." "The temperature dropped because the sun was setting," Stuart protested. "It was warm when we landed." "But it could change at any time," 3PO reminded him. "Remember yesterday, when the leaves suddenly dropped off the trees all at once? This planet is strange, I tell you." "You're exaggerating," Stuart exclaimed. They both turned to the viewport. The sun shone on a blanket of fallen leaves outside. "You see," Stuart said, "cool and clear. Perfect traveling weather." But just as the words left his mouth, the sky turned dark gray. Suddenly, it began to snow. You see, 3PO cried triumphantly. It's a blizzard. We can't possibly go out. It's not snowing that hard, Stewart protested. R2 beeped and whirred. I agree, R2, 4BX said. Let's gather whatever supplies we can before we start. 3PO wheeled to face 4BX. Wait a minute. You understood, R2? I've been compiling bits of his vocabulary since the start of the journey, 4BX answered as she hooked a finger around a supply box and lifted the lid. I see, 3PO said. He felt a little jealous that 4BX could understand R2. 3PO had always been the one to interpret whatever his friend was saying. After all, 3PO was the droid with language skills. Did 4BX have to take the lead in everything? Because the crash landing had scattered all the supplies, it took some time for Stewart and the droids to locate everything they would need and load it into transport packs. Finally, they were done. Do we have everything? 4BX asked. Condenser unit, glow rods, medpoc, macro binoculars? What about the fusion cutter? R2 took it and went outside, 3PO said. He also said he was going to pack the parachute we used for the landing. He said it would make a good blanket for Stewart if the temperature drops at night. Picking up the survival gear, Stewart, 4BX, and 3PO exited the pod. Outside, R2 was busy using the fusion cutter to unscrew the bolts in the hull of the pod. R2, what are you doing? 3PO asked. We can't take the whole pod with us. R2 loosened the last bolt. Then he pulled a curved sheet of metal off the frame of the pod. 4BX quickly rolled forward to help him lower the sheet to the snow-topped ground. R2 used the drill feature of the servo driver to poke a hole at the top of the sheet, which was still in the shape of the hull. I see, 4BX said approvingly. Very good, R2. Very good what? Stewart asked. I don't get it. What's R2 up to? Well, it's fairly obvious, 3PO said airily. Then fill me in, Stewart said. 3PO didn't have a chance to answer, which was lucky, because he had no idea what R2 and 4BX were doing. 4BX plucked a supply pack out of Stewart's hands and placed it on a sheet of metal. You see, her screen flashed a quick rainbow of colors, something she did when she was excited. R2 threaded a piece of carbon-spun rope into the hole he had made. It's a sled. This way we only have to drag the supply packs, not carry them. Stewart circled the sled as 4BX piled on the rest of the supply packs. It still looks heavy, he observed doubtfully. 4BX's screen flashed the micrograms of the sled's weight. Even at this weight, a small droid like R2 should have no trouble pulling the sled, she said. The friction between the sled and the snow. Friction, 3PO interrupted excitedly. I remember that concept, but when we were heading into the planet's atmosphere, you told us that friction slowed things down. Right, Stewart agreed. You said that the pod rubbed against the air to produce friction, which slowed the speed of our descent. So if R2's sled rubs against the snow, won't that slow it down too? That is true, 4BX said. Her screen flashed, and a diagram appeared. Look, there is friction between the sled and the snow, 4BX explained. But if you look at the diagram, you can see that it's quite low. That amount won't slow down the sled. R2 beeped and whistled. 3PO was just about to translate when 4BX spoke up. Yes, R2, we're ready, 4B said. I was just about to say that. 3PO cried. Wait, you guys, Stewart called. Look at this. Stewart pointed to an animal that seemed to be frozen on one of the pod wings. It looked like a lizard, except that it had wings that folded back against its body. Its skin was iridescent, shining colors of green, yellow, and purple. Stewart picked it up gently. I can feel its heartbeat, he said, but it's so cold and still. That's because it's a cold-blooded creature, 4BX said. Cold-blooded? Stewart asked. I'm surprised its blood isn't frozen solid. He held it against his body, trying to warm it back up. 4BX's screen shimmered uncertainly, then resolved into its usual cool blue. Maybe I shouldn't have used the term cold-blooded, she told Stewart. It's more correct to say that the creature is an ectotherm. You, on the other hand, are an endotherm, sometimes called a warm-blooded animal. Look, but it doesn't seem to be working, Stewart said worriedly. He stroked the skin of a lizard. The lizard feels so cold. The temperature is too low for it to survive, I'm afraid, 4BX said. That's why it's so strange to find it here. Maybe it got snared in the pod wing as we flew over a warmer climate. My guess is that if it doesn't return to its home climate, it will die. Stewart reached in the med pack and withdrew a piece of bandage. He made a sling around his neck and slipped the lizard inside, next to his chest. Are you sure you want to do that, Stewart? 4BX asked. The lizard isn't very large, but we're going a long way. Carrying him could tire you out sooner. I'm not leaving him, Stewart said firmly. Hopefully it will get warmer as the day goes on. Right, 4B? 4BX's screen flashed a wintry gray as the snowfall suddenly thickened. I certainly hope so, she murmured. But it didn't seem to get warmer. R2 rolled ahead of them, dragging the sled full of supplies. The snow became a dense, white curtain, and they soon lost sight of him. R2, 3PO called. His words were snatched by the wind and tossed back at him. Don't worry, 3PO, 4BX called cheerfully. R2 won't get lost. He has the electrocompass. Time passed in a blur of snow and wind. A weak sun struggled out from behind a cloud and beamed its feeble rays down on them. Stewart stumbled, exhausted from pushing through the wet snow. I think we need to rest, 3PO called to 4B. 4BX stopped. She contracted her legs and settled into her sitting mode. Her egg-shaped head rotated. I've been taking temperature readings. It's warming up, and the snow is starting to lift. That's good news, 3PO said, peering ahead for R2. He saw his compact friend still moving at the same steady pace. Oh, there's R2. Thank goodness, 3PO continued, relieved. We should tell him we're stopping. R2, R2, he shouted. But just then, as 3PO watched in horror, R2 fell through the ground and disappeared. Where did he go? Stewart shouted. I don't know, 3PO repeated, waving his arms. 4BX extended her legs again and began to move in R2's direction. 3PO ran next to her. Suddenly, 4BX's arm shot out to slow him down. The temperature has warmed and then chilled, making this surface very dangerous, 4BX said, walking across the snow at a fast clip, but testing every step. Can you feel that icy skin on top of the snow, 3PO? Yes, it's very slippery, 3PO said, his arms windmilling furiously as he fought to keep his balance. My hypothesis is that when the temperature rose, the top layer of snow began to melt, 4BX explained. When the temperature dropped, the melted snow froze again. When it refroze, it became a hard crust of ice on top of the other snow. Unfortunately, the crust was not hard enough to withstand the weight of the sled. So R2 crashed through and fell in a drift. We could not have foreseen this. It happened with surprising speed. On Delanton, a crust like this would normally form after a sunny spring day, followed by a freezing cold night. Don't worry, we'll get him out. As they drew closer to where R2 had disappeared, 4BX called his name. R2, where are you? They heard a faint beep. He's all right. Thank heavens, 3PO said. Don't move, 4BX warned. Stewart, you're the lightest. We're going to tie a rope around your waist. We don't want to lose you two. Lie flat and squiggle yourself over the ice until you can see R2. All right, Stewart agreed. He untied the sling and handed the lizard to 3PO. Will you hold the lizard? Anything, 3PO said. Just hurry. 4BX lifted one leg, then the other. Spikes shot out from the bottom of her feet. She planted herself in the snow. She took hold of the rope that Stewart had tied around his waist. It would serve as a safety line. Then she handed Stewart another rope and kept the other end. That rope would be used to haul R2 and the supplies out of the crevasse. Inch by inch, Stewart slithered over the ice-encrusted snow. Any moment he expected to crash through the ice. He could feel it shifting beneath him, but at last he reached the lip of the crevasse. Cautiously, he eased his head over the side. "Get you out in a second, R2, he called. He tossed the rope down to R2 and watched while the droid tied it to the sled and made sure the supplies were lashed securely. Then Stewart gave the thumbs-up sign to 4B. 4BX pulled up the sled, hand over hand. As soon as it hit the lip of the hole, Stewart hauled it over the edge and pushed it back on the ice toward 4BX and 3PO. "Now for R2, 3PO said. R2 clasped the rope with his pincer claw. 4BX settled herself into the ground and pulled, using all her strength. R2 slammed against the side of the crevasse. Snow cascaded down on his head. R2 beeped indignantly. "Careful, 4B," Stewart called. "We don't want to bury him. Go slower." With beeps and whirs and one long whistle, R2 finally appeared over the edge of the hole. Stewart reached out and grabbed him. Together with 4BX, he pulled him over the edge. With a shrill whistle, R2 landed on his side. "Hang on, R2, Stewart said, grinning. He righted the droid, and R2 rolled to safety, beeping furiously. "It's all right, R2, 3PO said, hurrying toward him. "It's just your dignity that's hurt." 4BXS antennae rose. "It's getting warm. And look at the trees. How curious. It's like instant spring." Only minutes before, they had been trudging through a heavy snowstorm. But now, green buds were appearing on the trees. The snow was melting beneath their feet and turned to mud. 3PO saw wildflowers in the meadow ahead, as though they'd sprung up in mere minutes. Stewart turned toward 3PO. "I'll take the lizard back," he said. 3PO eased the sling from around his neck and handed it to Stewart. "Let's continue," 4BX said. Her egg-shaped head rotated, her circuits clicking. The warmth of the sun would soon dry the mud, and the temperature was rising a few degrees a minute. It was perfect traveling weather, with a clear blue sky and not a cloud in sight. But a moment later, a shadow fell over the sun. "Well, that's curious," 4BX murmured. They all looked up. The dark cloud separated into individual shapes. Wings flapped in unison, accompanied by a distant caw-caw. "Birds," Stewart said. He took out the macro binoculars to study them. "What huge creatures," 4BX observed. "They're almost as big as bone gnawers." 3PO shuddered. "Oh, please don't mention those terrible creatures. Their huge, teeth-filled jaws can crush boulders, let alone a droid. If those creatures are anything like bone gnawers, I say we lay low." R2 beeped a yes, and 4BX nodded. "No sense in attracting attention," she agreed. "Do you see those rocks ahead? They could provide cover. I suggest we—" But 4BX didn't get to finish her thought. Suddenly, the lizard that had been dormant in the sling poked its head out of Stewart's jacket. It emitted a series of ear-splitting shrieks. "Will you get that thing to quiet down?" 3PO hissed. "SHHHH," Stewart said, trying to hold the squirming lizard against his body. The lizard jerked its head and began to shriek again. The sound bounced off the rocks and echoed in the stillness. "Oh dear," 4BX said. "I'm afraid the birds heard the lizard." R2 beeped frantically. 3PO watched in horror as the birds wheeled in formation and turned. The birds were heading straight for them. Without a word, Stewart and the droids took off for the shelter of the boulders. Shadows fell over them as the birds flew lower, their giant wings beating rhythmically. The group scrambled over the rocks, looking for a crevice big enough to hide in. "Here," Stewart called. He slithered into the crack. 4BX's arm shot out and extended even longer. She grasped R2 in her strong fingers and deposited him in the crevice. "Now you, 3PO," she cried. 3PO didn't need any more encouragement. He hoisted himself down into the crack. The bird flying at the top of the V formation suddenly swooped down, its claws extended. For B, 3PO screamed. 4BXS legs extended, shooting her down into the hole. The frustrated bird wheeled, cawing angrily. That was close, 3PO breathed. It's not over yet, 4BX said worriedly. Those beaks look awfully long. We need something to block that hole. 3PO screamed as the bird shoved its beak into the hole, missing him by millimeters. 4BX's hand shot out, and she slammed the beak hard. With a caw, the bird retreated. Stewart, R2, 3PO, look for smaller rocks, 4BX directed. Quickly. 3PO reached down for the biggest stone he could find. He handed it to 4BX. Stewart found a long, flat rock, which he handed to her. 4BX wedged the rocks into the opening, leaving just a tiny crack. She only hoped it would hold. More birds arrived, cawing furiously. The lizard suddenly began to screech again. Stewart, hold the lizard's mouth shut. 3PO screamed. I can't, Stewart panted. He keeps twisting away. The screeching bounced off the rocks and echoed, driving the birds into a frenzy. 3PO shrank back as he heard the scratch of their claws against the stones. The birds shrieked with fury as they tried to force their way into the opening. One bird shoved its slender beak into the crack between stones. 4BX rapped the beak with a sharp stone. With an ear-splitting cry, the bird angrily retreated. But soon, the birds grew tired of their effort. One bird took off, wheeling in a circle around the others. After a few half-hearted pecks, the other birds followed. Phew, Stewart said. I thought we were bird food, for sure. He peeked into the sling and petted the lizard gently. Are you okay, little fellow? Him? What about us? 3PO shuddered. 4BX yanked at the flat stone, trying to dislodge it. I think I wedged this in a little too tightly. Oh dear, 3PO moaned. Now we're buried alive. What could possibly happen next? Maybe R2 can help with a pincer claw, Stewart suggested. R2 tried to jimmy the rock free with the thin edge of a driver. With a burst of effort, the rock flew out of the opening, almost hitting 3PO in the head. R2 really, he exclaimed. Maybe 4B should give you another lesson in how friction works. Shakily, the group climbed out of the crevice. They scanned the sky above, which was empty. R2 picked up the sled rope, and they continued on their journey. The weather continued to warm as they walked. 4BX's antennae kept rising and trembling as she took reading after reading. I just don't understand this, she murmured worriedly. And I don't like it either. What's there to worry about? Stewart asked cheerfully. Traveling over grass is much easier than traveling over snow. We're making good time. R2 whistled a protest. He was having trouble dragging the sled. Let me help you, R2, Stewart offered. He took hold of the rope and walked alongside R2. After a few minutes, he stopped and wiped his forehead. Phew, this is hard work. R2 made it look easy earlier. That's because he pulled the sled over snow, not grass, 4BX said. Remember when I described higher friction? It's slowing the sled down more, making it harder to pull. You can always count on science to follow the rules. That's a great explanation, 4B, Stewart said grumpily. But it doesn't make it any easier to pull the sled. Why don't we just leave it here? We could load the supplies into packs. Good idea, Stewart, 3PO agreed. R2 flashed his lights and beeped. R2 has a point, 4BX said. The sled could come in handy later. Well, of course you'll side with him, 3PO grumbled. R2 chirped, then ended on a whistle that sounded awfully sarcastic to 3PO. Then he snatched up the rope to the sled and trundled away, dragging the sled behind him. Oh dear, 3PO fretted. Now he's gone off in a huff. R2 can be so sensitive. Stewart ran ahead as R2 disappeared around a bend. A moment later, they heard a whoop. He did it. R2 did it. Stewart yelled. Did what? 3PO muttered as 4BX zoomed ahead. Why am I always the last to know? 3PO rounded the bend. Ahead, he saw Stewart, 4BX, and R2 standing by a rushing blue river. Now 3PO could hear the sound of the water coursing over rocks and pebbles. R2 heard the river. Stewart shouted. But my auditory sensors are just as refined as his, 3PO complained as he picked his way over the rocks at the river's edge. I didn't hear a thing. Maybe because you were jabbering so much, 3PO, Stewart teased. R2 busily unloaded supplies from the sled. He placed them on the rocks nearby. So you decided to leave the sled after all? 3PO asked. I'm glad you see it my way, R2. I always say. R2 dragged the sled over to the river. He pushed it in, keeping careful hold on the rope. It bobbed in the shallow water. Excellent. 4BX's screen flashed a rainbow. It's a boat, Stewart cried. What a hypergalactic idea, R2. Now we can really move. 3PO regarded the sled dubiously. But will it hold all of us? May I point out that I am made of metal? I certainly don't float. 4BX's screen flashed a cheerful blue. Density is the key to floating. It describes something's weight compared to its size. Watch. But the sled, the boat, is metal, Stewart said. Metal is denser than water. So how could we possibly float? Look inside the boat, 4BX prompted. What is it filled with? Together, 3PO and Stewart peered into the boat. All I see are the supplies and some scrap metal R2 salvaged from the pod, 3PO said. What else do you see? 4BX directed. Nothing, Stewart said. Just air. Then his face brightened. Oh, I get it. Air is less dense than water. But why wouldn't the boat just sink while the air floated? 4BX's screen beamed yellow. In this case, the air inside the boat's sides counts as part of the boat. Let's use an example. So you could take the boat, the scraps, and the air and put them in a turbo blender. Suppose the result was a perfect mixture of the three. If you took a cupful of that mixture, it would be less dense than a cupful of water. It would float. But what if you added all of us to the blender? Stewart asked. A cupful of a new mixture would be denser than before, 4BX explained. But it would still be less dense than water. So, we would float, Stewart concluded. I'm not sure I like being put in a turbo blender, 3PO noted, but I'm glad to hear that I won't sink. So let's get going, Stewart said excitedly. He turned to 4BX and R2. Sorry I ever doubted you guys. You were totally right about finding the river. I won't argue with the two brains again. Excuse me, Master Stewart, 3PO said. Aren't you forgetting something? He waited for Stewart to mention that 3PO had a helpful brain, too. All right, Stewart said. I left the macro binoculars on that rock. 3PO lowered himself into the boat in a huff. Nobody noticed his mood, which just proved how neglected he was. R2 and Stewart followed. 4BX stood by, her screen slowly flashing from color to color. It meant she was pondering a problem. R2 beeped a question at her. No, I'm all right, R2, 4BX said. There's something nagging at me, but I can't quite place it. Sorry, 4B, but we don't have time for you to figure it out, Stewart said impatiently. We're burning daylight here. Daylight can't burn, Stewart, 4BX explained. Actually, He means that we're wasting time, 3PO interrupted, afraid 4BX would launch into another lecture. That's right, Stewart said anxiously. Now we only have 35 hours to make contact. 4BX stepped into the boat. You see, the thing is, she began, but her words ended in a very unscientific whoop as Stewart threw off the rope and the boat whirled away down the river. Wee-oh, Stewart yodeled. This is certainly an improvement on walking, 3PO said, settling himself on one side of the boat. At first, the boat sailed along smoothly. Then the craft picked up speed, causing 3PO to grip the side nervously. Spray hit their faces as the boat bounced along with a fast current. "We're speeding up," Stewart called. The wind blew his dark hair away from his intent face. "This is great. We'll make good time." "Oh dear," 4BX said. "What?" Stewart asked. "High water," 4BX said. "It's logical that the river would run high, considering how quickly everything thawed. I wish we'd stopped to make paddles." "But the current is carrying us so fast," 3PO said. "Why will we need to paddle? It's just wasted effort." "The paddles would help us steer," 4BX explained. "Steer around what?" Stewart asked. The boat got caught in an eddy, then popped free and whirled onward, faster than before. "Rocks for one thing," 4BX said, "because if we meet one at high speed, we could be in trouble. And what if we need to get ashore?" "You worry too much, 4B," Stewart said. And suddenly he stopped. "What's that noise? Is it voices? It's like a murmur." "That's not conversation you're hearing, Stewart," 4BX said worriedly. "That's what I've been trying to tell you. It's rapids." The boat shot forward around a bend. Ahead, they could see foaming white water. Rocks and boulders rose out of the churning water. "Any scientific suggestions, 4B?" Stewart yelled over the sound of the rapids. "Yes," 4BX answered. Her arms shot out, and her fingers grasped each side of the boat. "Hang on." Suddenly, the bow plunged into the churning water. R2 went flying, and 3PO grabbed him just in time. But it was hard to keep hold of R2 and the boat at the same time. As the boat hit another rapid and flew into the air, 3PO shrieked. He lost his grip on the boat and R2. He saved himself from falling into the river just in time. 4BX extended her legs and grabbed R2. She was able to intertwine her long steel toes to keep him secure. The force of the water suddenly sent the boat skimming sideways, straight into a boulder. 3PO screamed as they smashed against it. "We're doomed," 3PO cried. With an awful scraping noise, the boat popped free and whirled on. Caught in an eddy, the boat swirled for an instant, then shot forward over a small waterfall. 3PO gasped as they hung in midair for a moment, then crashed down into the turbulent river. A wave of water hit them, almost swamping the boat. "We're going to drown," 3PO yelled. 4B extended her arms. Metal expanded into webs between each finger, creating makeshift paddles. She dipped her hands into the water, trying to steer the boat away from the biggest boulders as it pitched and bucked. Through the mist ahead, they could see another patch of turbulent water. Now 3PO was aware of a roaring noise. "Waterfall!" 3PO cried, terrified. "We have to get ashore," 4BX yelled. She dug into the surging water. The boat careened through the rapids, slamming against the water again and again. But 4BX managed to reach calmer water at the edge of the river. Stewart jumped out to pull them to shore. They stepped out of the boat, relieved to be on land again. "You really saved the day, 4B," Stewart said admiringly. He checked the lizard inside the sling. It looked okay, but nervous. "What about me?" 3PO spoke up. "I helped too." "You mean by screaming, 'We're doomed' every 2 seconds?" Stewart asked with a grin. R2 gave a long whistle. "It isn't funny, R2, 3PO grumbled. "I think you can all see that paddles are necessary if we want to complete our journey on the river," 4BX pointed out. Stewart scanned the ground around them. He picked up a fallen limb. "How about this, 4B? Will this work?" 4BX gripped the end of the limb and hefted it. "This will make an excellent shaft," she told Stewart. "We'll need something wider as a paddle blade." R2 trundled off toward the makeshift boat. He reached in and brought out a thin sheet of scrap metal from one of the packs. It was oval-shaped, flat, and smooth. He showed it to 4BX. "Perfect, R2, 4BX approved. We can use the macrofuser to shape it." 3PO felt left out again. He wasn't terribly good at making things. He could make a good impression, of course. But paddles were another thing altogether. He watched as R2 macro fused the metal until it was a smooth, perfect oval. Stewart whittled the limbs into shafts. Then they fastened the metal blade to the shaft by using a small beam drill and carbon screws. Stewart held up the finished paddles. For B, how do you use these things anyway? I've never been in a boat without hydrosteering. It's very simple, for BX replied. The third law of motion says that for every push, there is an equal and opposite push. So you'll push on the water, and the water will push back on the paddle? Stewart asked doubtfully. Let's get back in the river, and I'll show you, 4BX suggested. But first, we need to bypass the waterfall. 3PO and Stewart carried the boat, and 4BX and R2 carried the rest of the supplies. They slithered downhill past the roaring waterfall until they reached calmer water. Then they relaunched the boat. Stewart and 3PO sat in the middle of the boat on opposite sides. 4BX handed each of them a paddle. Then she pushed the boat gently off the bank and stepped in. 3PO dipped his paddle and pushed hard against the water while Stewart did the same. The boat swung in a circle. No, 3PO, 4BX cried, clutching the sides of the boat. You have to dip your paddle forward, then back. Not back, then forward. We'll go in a circle forever. But equal force sounds like a tug of war, Stewart protested as he studied the diagram. It seems like neither the boat nor the water would move. Why does the boat move forward? 4BX's screen cleared. It is very much like a tug of war, only with pushes instead of pulls. Watch. That's easy, Stewart said. The other guy would win, no contest. There's no way I could stand my ground with wheels under my feet. Why not? 4BX prompted. Stewart frowned, thinking, my opponent could keep a grip on the ground because of the friction between it and his feet, he said. Wheels reduce friction, right? So I get shoved away because of lower friction. You are a born scientist, Stewart, 4BX said, her screen glowing. Compare that to the pushing contest between you and the river water. Several forces help the water stand its ground. Meanwhile, the friction between your boat and the water is low. As a result, you and your boat are easily pushed forward. Like this. 3PO and Stewart began paddling again. It took a few minutes to get themselves in sync, but soon they were moving swiftly down the river. Suddenly, Stewart burst out laughing. What's so funny? 3PO asked. I'm trying as hard as I can. It's the lizard, Stewart explained. He's tickling me. Carefully, he withdrew the squirming lizard from the sling around his neck. The lizard turned its head to check out its surroundings. It blinked in a lazy sort of way, then crawled up Stewart's arm and sat on his shoulder. Hey, little guy, Stewart said, smiling. Looks like you woke up. R2 chirped and whirred. What was that, R2? 4BX asked. It's going to storm? He said it's very warm. 3PO corrected triumphantly. 4BX wasn't perfect. And look, there's fruit on that tree now. When we landed, there were only leaves. 4BX's screen went murky. I've been trying to compute data since we landed. These climate changes are too sudden. They aren't logical, yet they exist. A true puzzle for a scientist. But I think I've developed a theory about Planet X. I know it sounds incredible, but I believe this place experiences 4 seasons in one day. This morning it was snowing. The trees were bare. Then, only hours later, the snow melted. And R2 crashed through a drift. 3PO remembered. Poor R2. Then the trees grew leaves. 4BX went on. Flowers bloomed. Evidence of spring, correct? And now look around. The leaves are full and green. The fruit is ripe and the grass is long. Summer. But how could the seasons go by so fast? Stewart asked. They last for months back home. I don't know yet, 4BX said. But when you try to solve a puzzle, you start with what you know. Let's look at how the seasons work on a planet like Delanton. Okay, that explains how we get one season, but how do we get the others? Stewart asked. How about another diagram? 4BX asked. You see, 4BX continued. On Delanton, the whole orbit takes a year, just over 365 days. But to get the speeded up seasons we're seeing here, this planet would have to make one whole orbit between sunrise and sunset. It would then make another whole orbit overnight. That sounds impossible, Stewart objected. My calculations agree with you, 4BX said. But you can't argue with reality, Stewart. Observation is the scientist's best friend. This is some hyper-wacky planet, Stewart said as he tucked the lizard back in the sling. Yes, it is, 3PO agreed. I can't wait to leave it. The sun traveled across the sky as they floated, keeping them warm despite a gathering chill. Stewart kept watch anxiously, sure that around the next bend the city would appear. R2 gave a series of chirps and whirs, and 4BX and 3PO both glanced at the riverbank. What did he say? Stewart asked, stroking with his paddle. It's fall, 3PO said. Look, the leaves have changed color. Animals adapt to seasonal changes, too, 4BX said. Some animals grow a heavier fur coat to keep themselves warm in winter. Other animals hibernate, sleeping through winter. Birds sometimes migrate. They fly to warmer places during the cold winter months. Often, they travel in groups called flocks, Stewart guessed. The birds that attacked us came from the south. Maybe they were migrating north for the summer. Excellent deduction, Stewart, 4BX approved. So, they don't live around here? 3PO asked. That's reassuring, I must say. Wait a second, Stewart said. If they migrated north in spring, wouldn't they migrate back south again? Very good, Stewart, 4BX said. I would say that is exactly what they would do. So, wouldn't they migrate in the fall? Stewart continued. 4BX said. An excellent, if somewhat disturbing, deduction. Oh dear, 3PO said. I think I see what you're getting at. They drifted with the current for a moment. All was eerily quiet. Everyone scanned the sky nervously. Then 3PO heard it, a distant caw-caw that sounded terribly familiar. Stewart, don't let that. 3PO began frantically, but it was too late. The lizard suddenly popped its head out of Stewart's sling and began to screech again. Throw that creature overboard, 3PO yelled over the sound of the lizard. But it was too late. The great wings of the birds beat steadily, carrying them swiftly toward the group. The sky grew black with their numbers, and this time there was nowhere to hide. 3PO frantically dug his paddle into the river. Stewart still had his paddle raised above the water as he struggled to keep the lizard in the sling. The boat swung wildly to the left, toward the middle of the river. Stop, 3PO! 4BX shouted. The boat began to turn in a circle. We're going nowhere. R2 chirped insistently. He said it's too late, 4BX began. So we should, 3PO continued. Protect Stewart, 4BX interrupted. By covering him with our bodies, 3PO got out in a frantic rush. They could hear the rush of wind as the great wings of the birds beat steadily, coming nearer. Stewart threw himself on the bottom of the boat. R2's arms shot out, and he suspended himself over Stewart's head. 3PO arranged himself over Stewart, trying to protect as much of the boy's body as he could. Finally, 4BX's arms and feet elongated and planted on the bottom of the boat, suspending her over them all. Let them try to attack us now, 4BX said grimly. 3PO was glad Stewart was protected, but he felt terribly exposed. If he got through this adventure without needing a new casing, he'd be lucky. That is, if the bird's sharp beaks didn't penetrate his circuits and put him out of commission altogether. The great birds swooped down on them. 3PO felt sharp claws deliver deep. Scratched down his flank. Oh dear, he moaned. Oh dear. 4BX suddenly screamed as she rose 3 feet off the boat. The bird had grabbed her with its claws and was strong enough to carry her away. No, 3PO screamed. He grabbed on a 4BX's dangling foot. Let her go, you overgrown feathered beast. Oh, 4BX yelled as the bird began to rise. Eel, 3PO screamed as he began to rise with her. The bird was even more powerful than he imagined, but he refused to let go of 4BX's foot. He wouldn't let the bird take her away. 4BX managed to work both her arms free. They lengthened until her long fingers could grasp the edges of the boat. Startled, the bird loosened its grip. 4B crashed down into the boat again, taking 3PO with her. Good work, 4B. 3PO panted. That was Classo. The boat tilted alarmingly, almost spilling them backward into the river. The bird had gripped the bow of the boat. 3PO saw water inches from his face. Then another huge bird swooped down and stretched its claws around the stem. The two birds then carried the boat between them, up into the air. 4BX gripped the sides of the boat, stabilizing the craft. Hoo-ha! 3PO screamed as they rose, higher and higher. What's happening? What's happening? Stewart shouted. From his position on the bottom of the boat, he couldn't see a thing. We appear to be flying, 4BX answered. I think you can all sit up now. We're fine. Considering we're in a tiny scrap of metal being carried by two ravenous flying beasts, 3PO said nervously. Stewart peered over the side of the boat. I just hope they don't drop us. We've left the river. It will be a hard landing. Please don't even mention the possibility, 3PO said. Don't worry, 4BX said. These birds are excellent flying machines. You may remember lift as the force that kept our escape pod in the air as Stewart piloted us in for our emergency landing, 4BX explained. Each bird's inner wing has a shape similar to that of the pod's wings. You see, it's this basic shape, called an airfoil, that creates lift, 4BX continued. That's marvelous news, 3PO approved. As long as it keeps us in the air, that is. R2 beeped and whirred. Good question, R2, 4BX said. And we're in luck. The direction we're traveling in is south. Exactly where we want to go. And we'll get there faster this way, Stewart said, peering over the side again. The boat rocked a bit when he shifted his weight. Please don't do that, Master Stewart, 3PO begged. I was finally able to pretend I was riding in a nice, stable airspeeder. Stewart carefully settled himself back in the bottom of the craft. Why do you think the birds took us, for B? Do we really need to know? 3PO asked comfortably. This is so much more pleasant than hiking. Let's watch this glorious sunset. I'm afraid we should be prepared for the answer to Stewart's question, 4BX said thoughtfully. I can think of two reasons why the birds took us. One, for nest building. Nest building? 3PO asked doubtfully. But we're not terribly comfortable. All this metal. Even I wouldn't want a nest on me. Birds scavenge all kinds of things for nests, 4BX explained. And we don't know the habits of these particular birds. They might make complicated structures, but I think it's more likely that they consider us a possible food source. When we get back to their nests, they'll discover that the droids are quite inedible. What will they do with us? 3PO asked in alarm. Discard us, most likely, 4BX answered. From a very significant height, I'm sure. Stewart, on the other hand, will make a tasty treat. Thanks for B, Stewart said. He looked green. All of a sudden, I don't feel so good. Don't worry, Stewart, 4BX said, beaming a cheerful yellow at him. We're not licked yet. R2 beeped several times. That's right, R2, 3PO said. We forgot about the parachute. Maybe we should fasten it to the boat, just in case the birds get tired of carrying us. That's not a bad idea, 4BX agreed. It must be in one of the supply packs. Stewart reached down to pick up a pack, but before he could open it, they heard a loud, angry caw above them. A fellow bird, larger and stronger than the birds that carried the boat, suddenly dived at the bird carrying the bow. Its beak tore into the smaller bird's flesh. I'm afraid our birds are under attack, 4BX said, just as the predator rammed into the smaller bird again, shaking the boat. 4BX gripped the boat more tightly, trying to stabilize the craft. Then the bird that was carrying the bow. loosened its grip, and the boat tipped to one side. Maybe we should do something about that parachute, 4BX called nervously. Too late. 3PO screamed as the bird dropped the bow completely. We're going down. The boat tilted alarmingly, almost spilling them out. But the bird who had been carrying the bow lunged and grabbed it again, just in time. The boat stabilized as the carrier birds beat their wings in unison and cawed furiously, protecting their treasure. But the attacking bird didn't fly away. With a ferocious cry, it dove toward the smaller bird once again. The predator tore at the bird's flesh while the smaller bird tried to defend itself with its sharp beak. The bird's mate at the stern screeched a warning. Oh my, 4BX yelled over the crying of the three birds. I had no idea these birds would fight over us. 3PO felt paralyzed with fear. Every time the boat tipped, he saw blue sky rush up at him. The ground tilted crazily far, far below. Stuart scrambled frantically through the supply packs. I can't find a parachute. Attack coming in toward the rear. 4BX's screen flashed crazily. Hang on. This time, the attacking bird chose to assault the bird at the stern. Claws outstretched, beak open, it struck again and again in a frenzied attack. The predator dug its claws into the neck of the smaller bird. The craft tilted as the smaller bird tried to twist away. Then, shrieking, it began to dive, and the bird carrying the bow followed. Wind whistled past the craft as it plummeted hundreds of feet in seconds. Stuart yelled, and 3PO screamed as the boat tilted crazily. Then the two carrier birds stabilized, their wings flapping furiously. Phew, Stuart said. That was close. As close as I ever want to get a falling, 3PO said. He peeked down to the ground. Through the dusk, he could just make out the terrain. It looks like sand. Stuart peeked over, too, and spiny plants. Ouch. At least we're a lower altitude, 4BX said, just in case we're dropped. Please don't say that, 3PO moaned. I'm sure the other bird has given up, but just in case, Stuart, find that parachute. Here it comes again, 4BX shouted. Claws outstretched, the predator dropped on top of the back of the bird holding the bow. The attacker's claws ripped into the smaller bird's flesh and stayed there. With a shriek of pain, the carrier bird dropped the boat and took off, with the predator still pecking and clawing at its body. Now the boat hung straight down, suspended from the claws of the bird holding the stern. The droids in 3PO held onto the sides, their feet dangling in midair. 4BX managed to catch one of the supply boxes with her toes, but the rest rained down onto the land below. Dee, 3PO screamed. Let's just hope the other bird doesn't let go. 4BX screamed as the bird suddenly dropped the boat and flew off. They only had time to feel sheer terror as the ground rushed up at them. Dots of color turned into plants. Smudges of gray turned into rocks. 3PO closed his eyes. He pictured his metal body scattered over the landscape. A golden arm here, a shiny foot there. And then they landed with an oof and a squish. A squish? Cautiously, 3PO opened his eyes. They had landed on a huge plant. What is this thing? Stuart asked. 4BX scratched at the plant, her screen flashing with data. It's a succulent, she said. It's adapted to dry desert conditions. This thick skin helps the plant store water. That's what saved us. Well, I'm very grateful to it, 3PO said fervently. It saved us from a ghastly end, I'm sure. Stuart unzipped his survival suit to check on the lizard. It lay against his body, its eyes closed as though it were asleep. It's getting dark, 4BX said worriedly. I suggest we locate as many supplies as we can. The boat and many of the boxes had also landed on or near the plant. Stuart and the droids canvassed the area and found most of the supplies. They gathered them and stacked them by the boat, then wearily climbed into it for shelter. Stuart shivered. It's awfully cold. I thought deserts were hot for B. Look up at the sky, 4BX instructed. The first stars of evening were beginning to twinkle. They looked bright against the deepening blue of the sky. No clouds, 4BX said. Deserts have very little cloud cover. That's what causes them to change temperature rapidly. They can reach temperatures of well over 100 degrees during the day, then lose up to 80 of those degrees at night. That's exactly what Tatooine is like, 3PO said. What a ghastly planet. It's either too hot or too cold. R2 beeped his agreement. The worst is that there is no shade either, 3PO complained. You could fry a Croy egg on my shell. In the desert, not only is there little shade from plant life, there is little shade from clouds, 4BX agreed. Most of the sun's rays reach the ground, making temperatures soar higher. Then, at night, there are no clouds to act as insulation. Insulation? Stuart asked. Could you explain that for B? Do you think she'd actually say no? 3PO murmured. R2 beeped at him, warning him to be nice. I'd be delighted, Stuart. 4BX beamed a cheerful yellow screen. Simply put, insulation is something that keeps heat in or out. If you lie in bed in a cold room, the heat travels from your body into the cold air around you. You get chilly. A blanket would act as insulation, keeping more heat in your body. Blanket, 3PO exclaimed. R2, we must find that parachute for Stuart. R2 and 3PO began to dig through the supply boxes. On the other hand, 4BX continued, if you carry a cold drink outside on a hot day, heat travels from the hot air into the cold liquid. Soon, your drink is warm. A thermos would act as insulation, keeping the heat out of your cold drink. Can we go back to the part about keeping heat in? Stuart asked, shivering. Certainly, 4BX answered brightly. At night, a layer of clouds acts much like a blanket. It keeps more heat in the air near the ground. But in a desert, the heat easily travels upward, away from the ground. Here it is, 3PO cried, flourishing the spun carbon parachute. It may not have saved us from that nasty fall, but might keep you warm, Stuart. He drew the parachute around Stuart, but the boy continued to shiver. R2 reached down into the bottom of the boat and brought up the scrap metal he'd stored. Then he beeped and whistled at 3PO, who handed him the tools. I don't know what you're going to do with those, 3PO stated. You can't make another blanket out of scrap metal. I'm worried about the lizard, Stuart said. I don't know if he can survive the cold. I'm more worried about you, Master Stuart, 3PO fussed. Stuart shivered. I can stand it for a few hours. Isn't spring a few hours away, Furby? Not during the night, I'm afraid, 4BX told him. The seasons are caused by sunlight. We only see the changes during the day. The nights would still be very cold. You'll have to wait until morning until you're warm again. Stuart groaned. The temperatures will be very hot for travel tomorrow, 4BX continued. We'll have to rest often. But we'll lose so much time. Stuart protested. If we don't find the rebels, they'll leave without us. Then we'll be stranded here. And I'll lose my chance to rescue Father, he finished brokenly. I'm sorry, Stuart. You'll lose strength if we don't take frequent breaks, 4BX reminded him softly. You're not used to a desert climate. We'll go as fast as we can, but the sand will slow us down. The sand, 3PO moaned. Oh, my poor joints. Stuart set his jaw. There must be a faster way to get out of here. They heard a hiss, and then a bright flame of light shot up from the bottom of the boat. R2 made a stove out of scrap metal and the rest of the fuel. 3PO told Stuart excitedly. Here, Master Stuart. Move closer. Stuart held his hands out to the heat source. That feels good. Thanks, R2. I suggest we turn in, 4BX said gently. It's been a very long day. They settled down for the night. The light of the stove and 4BX's radiant red screen made a comforting glow against the darkness. Stuart slept, and the droids took turns shutting down their circuits so that someone would always be on the watch. The next morning, the sun was low in the sky, and the temperature was a bit warmer. The boat had created a deep hollow in the plant when it landed, and the surrounding flesh was still cool to the touch. In a few hours, that sun will be almost directly overhead, Forbiac said, scanning the sky. The air temperature will rise quickly. Watch. Stuart wasn't really paying attention, though. He had noticed a low, buzzing noise and climbed out of the grounded boat to investigate. The wide crack in the large, succulent plant seemed to have come alive. It wriggled and writhed like a wide, black snake, but it wasn't getting anywhere. Stuart swallowed hard and took a few more steps. As he moved closer, one end of the snake seemed to rear up and somehow scatter into the air. Stuart felt something land on his arm. He looked down and saw a black-winged insect the size of his palm. It lit for a moment, then flew back toward the plant. "It's an attack," Stuart shouted, running toward the plant. He swatted at the huge insects. One by one, they hovered overhead for a moment, then dove at the plant again. 4BX and the other droids were there in a nanosecond. "Where's the attack?" asked 3PO, looking nervously around. "These insects," Stuart shouted between swats. "They're going to kill this plant. Don't just stand there, help." 4BX's screen flashed an unhappy color. "Stuart, I'm afraid it's too late," she said. "This plant's skin is tough, but our crash landing ripped it badly. The thick skin helped the plant keep water in and hungry insects out. Now that the skin is so seriously damaged, it can't do either. The plant will no doubt die." Stuart gloomily regarded the long tear. The insects were already flying away. Stuart swatted at one last insect, then gave up. Now it's nothing but insect food. What a waste. R2 whistled softly. "Exactly right, R2, Forbeck said, laying a gentle arm on Stuart's shoulder. "It's not a waste of those insects who feed on it, or the larger animals who will feed on the insects. This plant is part of a food web. If animal life on this planet is typical, the food web may look something like this. The death of this one plant will nourish many other animals," Forbiax concluded. "Hey," the lizard woke up. Stuart reached into his jacket and carefully slipped the lizard out. It flicked a long, lazy tongue. "Hey there, buddy," Stuart crooned. "Hungry?" Stuart broke off a tiny piece of fruit and held it out. The lizard bit the fruit, chewed, then spit out the remainder. "He's extracting water from it," 4BX said approvingly. "So if we stepped inside, the skin of the plant could insulate us right now?" Stuart asked. "Exactly right, Stuart," 4BX declared. "Isn't it fascinating how nature can protect us? Evaporation would also help us. Water from the plant tissue is turning from a liquid into a gas. For water to evaporate, it needs extra heat energy. In this case, the evaporating water is taking heat energy from the air. And less heat energy means..." 4BX waited expectantly for Stuart to finish her sentence, her screen sparkling an encouraging blue. "That we would stay cooler," Stuart finished triumphantly. Then he had another question. "But there's so much hot air out there," Stuart continued. "Why wouldn't it sink down into the tear in the plant's skin and push the cold air away?" "Hot air is less dense than cold air," 4BX answered. "In general, cold air tends to sink while hot air rises." Her screen shot a golden light. "Isn't nature marvelous?" Suddenly, Stuart's mouth dropped open. He looked up at the sky. Then he looked at the parachute. He looked back up at the sky. "Hot air rises," he exclaimed. "Of course. I know how to get us out of here." Stuart scrambled back to the boat. He brought back the stove R2 had fashioned. He pointed from the parachute to the stove to the sky above. "Is this some kind of game?" 3PO asked. "Because I'm stumped." "A hot air balloon," Stuart cried. "We have everything we need. We can make the parachute into a balloon. And we have the stove and fuel. The boat can carry us." 4BX's screen flashed a rainbow of colors as a stream of data ran across it. Then it cleared and shone bright blue. I think it might be possible, she said excitedly. R2 beeped a question. R2 just pointed out that we'll have to use all our remaining fuel. 4BX translated. And he asked if we're willing to take that chance. 3PO rushed in to complete. We've got to, Stewart declared. We don't have much time left. 25 hours, 4BX confirmed. Let's take a vote, Stewart suggested. His hand shot up in the air. I vote yes. 4BX raised a long metal arm. I think we ought to take the chance as well. R2 beeped in agreement. Everyone looked at 3PO. It wasn't as though he wanted to put his faith in a piece of fabric and a makeshift stove, but he didn't want to stay in a desert, either. He could feel sand gathering in his joint. Connectors. Besides, if they didn't reach the rebels in time, he could be stranded on this dreadful planet forever. He raised his hand. Let's proceed. The circuits of 4BX and R2 began to click in happy unison as they made a series of calculations. The two of them sometimes spoke a language 3PO didn't understand, full of numbers and formulas. He was glad to have two smart friends, but sometimes it made him feel lonely. What are you talking about, guys? Stewart asked impatiently. We're just planning how to do this, 4BX told him. Luckily, it's not complicated. A hot air balloon needs three basic things. The burner heats the air inside the envelope, 4BX continued. Heated air is less dense than the cooler air around it, so it rises or floats upward. Where are the steering controls? Stewart asked. There are no controls, 4BX answered, other than the burner itself. It allows the pilot to take the balloon up and down. As I mentioned, to send the balloon up, you heat the air inside the envelope. To take the balloon back down, you open a vent at the top of the balloon. The vent allows some hot air to escape and some cooler air to seep in from below. That makes the balloon denser, so it starts to sink back down toward the ground. Up and down. Stewart frowned. We have to do more than go up. That will just give us a bird's eye view of the desert. I think I've had enough of a bird's eye view. Thank you, 3PO put in. 4BX's screen flashed a sunny yellow for an instant, which meant she was amused. True, 3PO, she said, but there's something we need up there. Wind. Actually, we need layers of wind currents, streams of air flowing in different directions. We must find one that will push us south toward the settlement. So how do we find it? Stewart asked. We go up and down until we find the right current, 4BX explained. For instance, the air currents above us could run something like this. In a few hours, they had fashioned the hot air balloon. R2 drilled more holes. In the scrap metal that had gone through so many transformations, now would serve as the balloon's gondola. 3PO made sure there were no holes in the fabric of the parachute, and then, together with 4BX, he fastened it to the gondola. Meanwhile, Stewart tied ropes at all four sides of the gondola and staked them into the sand. R2 propped the stove above the center of the gondola, and they loaded the supplies. Then R2 started up the stove, and they carefully filled the balloon with hot air. It's going to work, Stewart crowed. It looks a little makeshift, 3PO said critically. As long as it flies, 4BX said. That's the important thing. Let's board. 4BX, R2, and 3PO stepped into the gondola. One by one, Stewart cut the lines. Then he quickly jumped in as the gondola began to rise. R2, are you sure this is going to work? 3PO whispered. R2 beeped cheerfully. You think so? 3PO asked in a panic. He squeezed his photoreceptors shut. What a view! 4BX exclaimed a moment later. Totally galactic, Stewart cried. Cautiously, 3PO reactivated his photoreceptors. It was good to see the burning desert below and not be in the middle of it. We're going a little too fast, I think, 4BX said to R2, who was controlling their ascent. Stewart might run into problems. What problems? Stewart asked gleefully. This is the way to travel. Stewart sounded breathless. 3PO guessed he was excited, but then Stewart began to take in breath with great gasps. His eyes widened in panic as he fought to breathe. The atmosphere is too thin, R2. 4BX rapped out. Bring us down. As R2 guided them down, 4BX turned to Stewart. Don't worry, Stewart. You'll feel better in a minute. The atmosphere is thinner the higher we go. That means that the air molecules are farther apart. Each breath has fewer molecules in it. So I had to breathe harder to get more molecules, Stewart guessed. I sure didn't like the feeling. No, it must be unpleasant, 4BX said. We have to be careful not to get so high again. R2 gave a happy beep. R2 says we found a good wind current. It's bringing us southward, 3PO explained. Stewart turned to face forward. The wind blew his dark hair away from his face as he stared at the horizon. I'm coming, Father, he whispered. They traveled over desert and forest and plain as the day went on. The sun set and the sky twinkled with stars. While Stewart slept close to the stove for warmth, his hand resting on the lizard underneath his jacket, R2, 3PO, and 4BX kept the balloon on course. Stewart awakened with the sunrise. He munched on a protein cube and a piece of fruit as the sky turned blood red. The colors streaked through a bank of dark clouds. What beautiful colors, 3PO exclaimed. I'm sure it's a good omen. 4BX's screen went gray. I'm afraid it isn't, 3PO, she said in a worried tone. I don't like the shape of those clouds. I think they're rather pretty, 3PO said, admiring them. Look how some of them spread out on top, Stewart agreed as he fed a piece of fruit to the lizard. Like a Wookiee on a bad hair day. That one looks more like a fuzzum to me, 3PO said, pointing. As Stewart laughed, 4BX's screen flashed a warning red. What I see are cumulonimbus clouds with anvil-shaped tops. Okay, so it's not a mussed-up Wookiee, Stewart said, still grinning. But what's the problem? Clouds are made mostly of water droplets and water vapor, water that has evaporated into gas, 4BX explained. Because those clouds reach so high in the air, they're super cold inside. In those chilly temperatures, some of the water vapor in the clouds is turned into ice crystals. Some of the water drops have frozen into tiny ice pellets called grauple. Fierce winds blowing up and down inside the cloud toss the crystals and grauple around. When the two kinds of ice collide, they sometimes become charged with static electricity. The crystals become positively charged and the grauple becomes negatively charged. I know what static electricity is, Stewart said. Back home, when I walk across my bedroom carpet, I get charged with it. Then if I touch metal, I feel a little shock. It's no big deal. Why should it be a problem inside the cloud? If the ice crystals and grauple stayed mixed together, it wouldn't be, 4BX answered. But the cloud has strong upward and downward winds called updrafts and downdrafts. Because the ice crystals are lighter, many of them are, blown to the top of the cloud. That gives the upper part of the cloud a positive charge. Meanwhile, the heavier grauple sinks toward the bottom of the cloud. So the lower part of the cloud becomes negatively charged, like this. Stewart pointed at the screen. All this built-up positive and negative charge must make for a huge discharge. That sounds almost like. Suddenly, a huge flash lit the sky. Lightning, Stewart finished. He tucked the lizard back into the sling. 4B confirmed Stewart's conclusion with a new diagram. R2, I suggest we land immediately, 4BX said urgently. The land looks green below. We should be able to find shelter. R2 began a slow descent, but they were caught by a fierce wind current, which blew them directly into the course of the storm. Lightning flashed and the skies opened. Rain drenched them within seconds. The gondola swung crazily with the force of the winds. R2 battled to keep them on course, but he had enough trouble keeping them from overturning. We got to land, 4BX shouted. R2 whistled at 3PO. All right, R2, 3PO yelled over a thunderclap. We'll guide you down. The three of them peered over the side while R2 handled the descent. The rain created a gray curtain that made it impossible to see clearly. Stewart wiped his eyes constantly, trying to peer downward. 3PO thought he spied a green field below. There, he cried, pointing. That looks perfect. 4BX agreed. Just about 100 feet to the left, R2. The wind gust blew them over the field. Down, 3PO shouted. R2 piloted the balloon down to the planet's surface. The gondola bumped gently on the ground. Good work. 3PO congratulated him. We're safe. Just as he said this, a fierce gust of wind knocked over the gondola. They spilled out, but instead of landing on the ground, they crashed right through it. To 3PO's surprise, the green field turned out to be a thick blanket of treetops. He hit a branch and bounced, then fell a few feet to bounce on another. Ow! He heard Stewart below him, also bouncing from branch to branch. R2 clunked his way downward, beeping wildly. 4BXS circuits clicked, and her screen flashed red with each jarring collision. The final drop was onto a carpet of thick moss. 3PO landed with a bump. He sorrowfully regarded a dent in his right flank. My poor metal. Stewart, are you all right? R2, 4B. R2 beeped a weak reply, and 4BXS screen flashed slowly from color to color as she checked her circuits. I'm fine, she said. Stewart flexed his arms and legs. Nothing's broken. But I lost the lizard. Oh, that's too bad, 3PO said politely. Don't worry, Stewart. The lizard has wings, remember? 4BX said. It probably flew away in the confusion. It's very warm here. I'd say we're in its native habitat. It is warm, Stewart noted, but it's morning. Shouldn't it be winter? I believe that we're close to the planet's equator, the imaginary line that divides the planet's northern hemisphere from its southern hemisphere, 4BX said. Let me show you. The bad news is we were blown too far south by the storm, 4BX continued. We've overshot the city. Oh, I knew there would be bad news, 3PO moaned. So what do we do now? R2 beeped a suggestion. Climb back up, 3PO asked in disbelief. I barely made it down alive. 4BX listened to R2's chirps and whirs. He's right, she told the others. We need the supplies, and we might be able to salvage the parachute. We only have 12 hours left to find the city. I'll go and check it out, Stewart offered. Excellent suggestion, 3PO agreed. He settled himself against the trunk. I think we should all go, 4BX said. If we can't salvage the parachute, we'll have to get the supplies down anyway. We all have to pitch in. The branches were wide and spaced close together. Stewart nimbly hoisted himself from branch to branch, but R2 often needed help. At last they reached the large branch where the gondola had landed. It was wedged in the V where the branch met the tree. R2 examined the parachute while 4BX, Stewart, and 3PO checked the supplies. R2 gave an unhappy series of beeps. We can't use it, 3PO sighed. We lost most of the supplies, too. We got to find a way out of here, Stewart said anxiously. Time is running out. Well, it could be worse, 4BX said. I can't imagine how, 3PO said. Well, I suppose I can, but I certainly don't want to. At least we're in no immediate danger, 4BX pointed out. Let's put our heads together and try to figure out the next. 4BX stopped abruptly. Her auditory sensors rose and trembled as they took a reading. Do you hear it? She whispered. Everyone listened carefully. 3PO heard it first, the caw-caw that sent his circuits into a tizzy. Not those birds, he cried. Let's not panic, 4BX said. We're well concealed by the branches, and the lizard isn't here to alert them to our presence. Just then, 3PO saw a green flash. The lizard flew down and landed on Stewart's shoulder. Hey there, Stewart greeted it happily. The lizard opened its mouth and screeched. Stewart quickly clamped his hand around the lizard's mouth. But another, louder screech followed the first one. Stewart, keep it quiet, 3PO warned. I'm trying, Stewart protested. Another screech rose in the forest. Then another and another. 3PO looked around wildly. Now he could see that lizards surrounded them, sitting on branches and blending in with the greenery. Their mouths were open as the screeching noises grew louder and louder. As the birds came closer, the screeching of the lizards intensified, causing Stewart to put his hands over his ears. Above them, the birds began to circle as their numbers grew. A bloodthirsty caw-caw echoed through the forest. Go ahead and say it, 3PO, Stewart whispered. We're doomed. R2 beeped rapidly and flashed his lights. The gondola, 3PO cried. We should flip it over, 4BX started. And use it for protection, 3PO said. With Stewart on the bottom again, 4BX concluded. With a mighty pull, 3PO loosened the gondola from the V of the trunk. With Stewart and 4BX's help, he flipped it over. The lizard took off, and Stewart crawled underneath. The droids followed. 3PO peeked out from the small crack left at the bottom. More and more lizards are flying in to join the others, he whispered. It looks as though the whole forest is alive. I can hear them, Stewart said, wincing. The screeching is a distress call, 4BX murmured. When Stewart's lizard made it during our first encounter, he was out of his habitat, so none of his fellow creatures could answer. The shadow of the bird's giant wings fell over the forest. Their great caws filled the air. They're here, 3PO whispered. But this time, the blood-curdling cries were answered by the screeching of the lizards. What's happening? Stewart asked. I think the birds are confused by the number of lizards, 3PO said excitedly. They're just circling. Now the lizards are taking off. They're attacking the birds. 3PO tilted the boat so that he could monitor the bloodthirsty battle. The lizards flew toward the circling birds in close formation. Then at the last moment, two sections separated at both ends of the line and dove toward the birds. It's a double flanking maneuver, 3PO cried. Oh, Master Luke would be so impressed. The great battle began. The birds were larger and stronger, but the lizards were more numerous and had better tactics. They encircled the birds in a pincer movement and attacked them ferociously. Sunlight flashed on iridescent skin as their claws and teeth ripped into the cawing birds. With flapping wings and angry cries, each bird tried vainly to peck at their smaller attackers. But the lizards hung on, shredding flesh with their sharp teeth and digging their claws into the wings of the frantic birds. With dying cries, one bird fell to the forest floor. Then another. Their comrades tried to wheel and launch an attack on the lizards, but they were outmaneuvered once more. Again and again, the lizards dove relentlessly at the bloodied birds, tearing into their flesh and then flying off, only to return and assault them again. With a huge, angry cry, one bird took off, calling for the others to follow. With shredded flesh and tattered feathers, the flock made a disorderly retreat. The birds are leaving, 3PO cried. We're saved. 3PO pushed the gondola over. They climbed out just in time to see the last ragged birds flying away as fast as they could. The lizards slowly dropped back to the shelter of the trees. One of the lizards separated from the pack and flew to Stuart. It perched on his shoulder. Thank you, fella, Stuart told it. That was a hypergalactic save. 3PO climbed back into the right side up gondola. He sighed. Now what? R2 trundled over to sit next to him. 4BX followed, and then Stuart, still petting the lizard. R2 whistled and chirped. R2 thinks we should abandon the gondola and hike out. 3PO translated. We can forage for food for Stuart on the way. That could be an unacceptable risk, 4BX said, her screen dimming. Perhaps we should try to fix the parachute first. Oh dear, 3PO sighed. I don't know what the right thing to do is. The lizard croaked in Stuart's ear. He's trying to tell us something, Stuart said excitedly as the croaking grew louder. Sorry, 3PO said. I speak 6 million languages, but flying lizard isn't one of them. Suddenly, the lizards in the surrounding trees took to the air. In a mass, they flew toward the group. They're attacking, 3PO cried. But the lizards didn't touch Stuart or the droids. With their powerful jaws, they grabbed hold of the ropes that had once fastened the parachute to the gondola. They flapped their wings, and the gondola slowly rose in the air. They're helping us, Stuart cried. He's thanking us for bringing him home, I bet. It's a good assumption, Stuart, 4BX agreed as the gondola moved smoothly into the air. Soon, they were gliding above the trees. We're moving north, 4BX noted. They must know where we were headed. These lizards must have a superior form of intelligence, even if they can't communicate. They must have figured we want to go back to our own kind. I knew it, Stuart said. They soared just above the treetops. The only sound was the soft whisper of the lizard's wings. The sound lulled the passengers, and Stuart grew drowsy. Soon, the forest was left behind, and they skimmed above a flat, arid plain. I see it, 3PO suddenly called. I see the city. Stuart woke. He craned his neck. I see it too, he cried excitedly. It has some sort of dome over it. An enclosed city, 4BX said, nodding. That makes sense, considering the climate extremes. What's the time check for B? Stuart asked anxiously. We have a little over 2 hours to reach the city and locate the rebel faction, 4BX said. Not much time. It will have to be enough, Stuart said grimly. The lizard's wings beat slowly, as if drawing the gondola was becoming more of an effort. Stuart felt the skin of his little friend. He's getting cold for B, he said worriedly. We're too far north, out of their habitat, 4BX said. Since they're cold-blooded, they're slowing down. They have to return. Did you hear that, fella? Stuart told the lizard. You've done all you can. The lizard gave a soft croak. The lizards carrying the gondola stopped struggling. They glided softly down to the planet's surface. Thank you, Stewart told the lizard. R2 flashed his lights. 4BXS screen glowed her prettiest rainbow. 3PO bowed. We wish you a safe journey home, he said. The lizard rubbed its head against Stewart's shoulder. Then, with a final soft cry, the small creature flapped its wings and rose. Together with the rest of the flock, it flew southward. Stewart waved until the last lizard was out of sight. The sun was now low in the sky. Clouds rolled in from the west. The sky was an odd greenish color. 4BX eyed it uneasily. Data flowed across her screen. We'd better start walking, Stewart said. How long do you think it will take to reach the city, 4B? I'm not sure, 4BX replied. I just hope the weather holds. Just then, they heard a rumble of thunder. So we get a little wet, Stewart said with a shrug. We've been through worse. 4BX eyed the clouds anxiously. She pointed to a funnel-shaped cloud in the distance. Welcome to worse, she said. What is it, 4B? 3PO asked over R2's inquisitive beep. He eyed the cloud nervously. That funnel-shaped cloud is produced by a tube of whirling wind called a tornado, 4BX said. Her screen flashed rapidly. If a tornado can carry a gondola, 3PO said hesitantly, does that mean it could carry us? I'm afraid so, 4BX said. We must find shelter. R2 rotated his domed head. 4BX's head spun around. 3PO and Stewart craned their necks. All they saw was flat, empty plain. The safest place is underground, 4BX explained. Even a deep ditch would help. Maybe we can dig one with the gondola, 3PO suggested. No time. 4BX's voice rose over the sound of the rising wind. Let's strap ourselves in the gondola, Stewart suggested. I'm afraid that won't do much good, 4BX said reluctantly. At least we'll be together, Stewart said. The wind tore at his clothing, and he had to yell to be heard. 4BX nodded slowly. All right, she shouted over the rising wind. My outer shell is made of shock-absorbing material. Keep your arms around me, Stewart. I'll try to protect you. They climbed into the gondola and wound the spun carbon rope around themselves. 4BX wound her legs and arms around Stewart and locked her fingers and toes. The sound of the wind was terrifying. A gust snatched the remaining supplies out from the bottom, and they were carried away. There was no time to worry about them. The wind was a screaming force now, blowing the gondola horizontally straight toward the funnel cloud. A whirling column of sand, the tornado, rose before them. Hold on, 4BX yelled over the screaming wind. We're being sucked in. It was a sound louder than anything 3PO had ever heard. Louder than the sound of a fleet of X-Wings taking off. Louder than a Star Destroyer firing all of its laser cannons at once. The wind tore at the gondola, driving it upward into the tornado. The gondola spun slowly at first, then picked up speed as it rose. The world became a blur of flying dust and roaring wind. 3PO could only lock his fingers around the gondola and hang on, his visual sensors closed tight. It seemed to last forever, but it was probably no more than seconds before they spun out of the funnel. They flew through the air and landed with a crash. Stewart? Master Stewart! 3PO cried. Stewart's head was still pillowed against. 4BX. Stewart, 4BX called frantically. Are you all right? Slowly, Stewart raised his head. He blinked his green eyes. Hypergalactic, he said shakily. Oh dear, you gave me such a fright, 3PO scolded. I'm glad to see you're all right. As for me, a few more dents don't matter, I suppose. That landing was softer than I expected, 4BX said. What exactly did we land on? They peered over the gondola's edge. It looks like some sort of dry grass, 3PO observed. R2 chirped and whirred. 3PO surveyed their immediate surroundings. Yes, R2. I see those heaps of grass over there. Each one seems to have a conical shape, almost like a roof, Stewart supplied. But it's not attached to a house. In tornado country, people often build shelters underground. 4BX observed. If this area is populated, those could be shelters, which is good for us, since conditions are still ripe for another twister. I suggest that we locate the openings to the shelters. Maybe we can find people to convey us to the city. Oh dear, I think they found us, 3PO said. Around them, openings in the grassy mounds began to appear. Doors in the mounds lifted, and people began to climb out. They carried sharp prong blades on top of slender sticks and wore several weapon-filled belts around their tunics. The settlers circled the droids and Stewart. Someone pointed to the damage to the grassy mound where the gondola had landed. The settlers began complaining in a strange, harsh language. They don't look too happy, Stewart muttered. Yes, 4BX remarked. It appears we are in a tight spot. No kidding, Stewart said, eyeing the fierce-looking group. I say we take them. If we don't get out of here now, we'll never be rescued. I suggest, 3PO began, but was interrupted by R2's beeps. R2 says we have the element of surprise. 4BX translated. That's true. Frustration washed over 3PO. As usual, no one was asking his opinion. What I think. On the count of 3, Stewart said out of the corner of his mouth. 1, 2. Hang on, Stewart, 4BX whispered. We haven't heard from 3PO. Gratified, 3PO spoke in a low tone. I suggest we apologize. After all, we did wreck their dwelling. And may I point out that I'm programmed for diplomacy in 6 million lang. Suddenly, a bearded cave dweller jumped forward. He shook his pronged spear angrily and let loose a flood of language. 3PO circuits clicked as his memory banks attempted to identify the language. He located words and phrases, then recognized the language as Nor. This meant he was able to translate what the stranger was saying. Oh, dear, 3PO whispered to his friends. I'm afraid they're very, very angry. So let's charge, Stewart suggested. Let me try diplomacy first, 3PO suggested. He knew from a Nor vocabulary that the population was inclined to use flowery phrases for apology and flattery. 3PO stood. He held out his arms, palms out. Strangers and friends, we apologize with all our hearts for landing on your dwelling. The tornado picked us up and dropped us here. Not for 12,000 moons will I ever allow myself to forgive this terrible event. Then he bowed his head. There was a murmur from a group. 3PO heard a woman say appropriate sentiment. Perhaps he had saved them from punishment. We should forgive them, perhaps, a man muttered. The whirlwind has done similar damage. No one can predict how it will move. Just as 3PO began to relax, the man with the glistening black beard stepped forward. 3PO noted anxiously that he was tall and muscular. He looked like a leader. I do not trust these strangers who dropped from the sky, the settler said in a deep voice. I think the golden being is lying. The cave dwellers looked at one another. Granite is usually correct, someone murmured. Our apologies are weak compared to the damage, 3PO said quickly, but we would commit ourselves to repairing the dwelling. Easy for him to say, Granite snorted. They do not look as though they could fix a child's toy. The cave dwellers moved forward. 3PO noted nervously that their hands went to their belts, casually moving for their weapons. 3PO, Stewart asked nervously. Give me that azurite you stole on Yavin 4, 3PO said urgently. But I gave it back, Stewart protested. Give it to me, Master Stewart, 3PO ordered. I know you saved a piece, and it's in your pocket. It's our last hope. R2 beeped, and 4BX's screen flashed. Do it, Stewart, she ordered crisply. Stewart dug into his pocket and handed 3PO the azurite. We suggest a game of chance of your choosing, 3PO said. If we win, you will help us reach the domed city. If we lose, we will give you our most valuable possession. 3PO held the chunk of azurite aloft. The setting sun hit the mineral, causing it to flash with a clear blue light. Azurite was renowned as one of the most beautiful minerals in any system. We accept your offer and suggest space poker, Granite said. Agreed, 3PO said. The azurite is not enough, however, Granite said. It is hardly worth the destruction of our meeting house. It took us months to build it. That is true, someone said. But what else should we ask for? I say after we win, we dismantle the droids and sell them for scrap, a woman suggested. Oh dear, 3PO murmured. And kill the boy, someone added. Why should we feed him? There is little enough to go around. That is foolish waste, another woman said. We should sell them all to the next slaver who comes around. Everyone nodded at this. What are they saying? Stewart asked 3PO. 3PO instantly decided it was better not to tell the others the grisly fate that awaited them if they lost. After all, it was still possible they could win the game of chance. They have decided on space poker. I have one suggestion, 3PO said. He turned to 4BX. Don't lose. Space poker, Stewart exclaimed. That's my game. But 4BX can calculate odds and strategies, 3PO protested. She should play. Poker isn't about knowing the odds, Stewart declared. It's about playing against them. I haven't met my match yet. I confess that I don't feel confident about my abilities in this area, 4BX said. Perhaps we should let Stewart try. R2 whistled agreement. 3PO nodded reluctantly, and the four of them followed Granite to his cave-like dwelling. Stewart and Granite sat across from each other at a small round table. Granite dealt out a series of cards marked with basic symbols. 3PO didn't understand the game, and he didn't want to try. He just had to trust Stewart. Stewart studied his hand while Granite did the same. 4BX inched over to 3PO's side. Congratulations, 3PO. It would have been terrible to come so far only to be captured or dismantled. If we make it out of here soon, we might be able to make it to the city in time. How did you know to wager the azurite? It was fairly simple. 3PO. I see, 4BX said, nodding. They most likely gamble as a way to pass the time during the many retreats they must make underground. Excellent deduction. Deduction. We couldn't have done it without you, she whispered as Stewart slapped down a card. R2 softly whistled his agreement. Granite played a card, and Stewart studied his hand. I just hope Stewart is able to win, 3PO added in a murmur to 4BX. Well, if he doesn't, we're just out a chunk of azurite, 4BX answered philosophically. 3PO gulped. He didn't want to mention that the stakes were much higher. He turned back to Granite and Stewart. He couldn't tell who was winning and who was losing. Stewart held his cards and regarded them with a face carved in stone. Granite whistled under his breath in a careless way. 2 turbos, Stewart said. Down easy. 1 propulsion, Granite said. Over and down. 3PO had no idea what that meant, but Stewart looked confident, so that gave him hope. Unless Stewart was bluffing. 3PO grew nervous again. Granite squinted at Stewart as Stewart laid down a card. Then he laughed. 3PO did not like the sound of the laugh. Not at all. Granite threw down his cards. Stewart did the same. Full planetary system, Granite said in a satisfied tone, using Stewart's language instead of his native Nor. That beats 3 satellites any day. What does that mean? 3PO asked nervously. It means I lost, Stewart said, dejected. Give him the azurite, 3PO. Then let's get out of here. Granite held out his beefy hand. 3PO placed the azurite in his palm. A second later, it disappeared into the pocket of his tunic. And now, the fun begins, Granite said. He reached into a dark corner and withdrew a long, sharp weapon. 3PO took a step backward as he was struck dumb with fear. He recognized the weapon as a force pike, a pole arm tipped with a vibro edge head that could kill or stun with a single touch. The force pike was the weapon of choice of the Emperor's Royal Guard. R2 gave a soft, warning beep. 4BXS screen rapidly flashed red. What's going on, Granite? Stewart asked, edging next to the droids. We had a deal. You got your azurite. Didn't your friend tell you? Granite asked. Now you are our slaves. 3PO? Did you leave something out? Stewart stammered, backing away from the tip of the force pike. Granite leaned close to them. His black gaze was fierce and ruthless. 3PO shrank back in fear. What would he do? Destroy them? Sell them to a slave trader? Looks like the Force wasn't with you today, Stewie, Granite said. He winked. The princess will probably tell you not to gamble so much in the future. The P-Princess? 3PO stammered. You can't be. On your side, Granite answered gruffly. Lucky for you. He shook the force pike. I got this off an Imperial during a rebel skirmish on Rom. Princess Leia contacted me and told me to be on the lookout for 3 droids and a small boy. My orders are to transport you off the planet. R2 beeped a question, and 3PO translated. What exactly is this planet? Are we still in the Delantan system? Granite nodded. This is the planet Denor. Unfortunately, the Imperials have taken over. Rebel operatives have all transported off the planet. My orders were to stay behind and wait for you 4. So the domed city isn't safe, 3PO said. Oh dear. You're lucky you didn't reach it, Granite told them. You would have been arrested immediately. The Imperials are conducting surprise searches of all the camps around the city like this one. Every moment you're here puts you in danger. Can you arrange to get us back to Yavin 4? 3PO asked hopefully. Sorry, Granite said shortly. Our ships on Denor no longer have that range. The Imperials have removed all hyperspace controls to keep us local and within their control. R2 whirred and beeped. Do you have a range to send us to a port that isn't under Imperial control? 3PO translated. Granite shook his head. The best I can do is bring you to the secret rebel base on Rom. But the princess ordered evacuation of the entire Delantan system, 4BX pointed out. Officially, yes, Granite admitted, but one faction remains to help coordinate an overthrow of the Imperials. It's not an easy journey. Imperial troops and spies are reported to be everywhere. That sounds dangerous, 3PO remarked nervously. Staying here would be more so, Granite told him grimly. But Rom is exactly where we want to go. Stewart said excitedly. My father has been captured. We can form a rescue party on Rom. Granite frowned. Princess Leia didn't say anything about a rescue party. I suggest we deal with one thing at a time, 4BX said. If Granite is correct, we must leave Denor as quickly as possible. Excuse me, Granite, 3PO said politely. Would you mind if we talked it over privately? We all have to agree on decisions. Of course. Granite bowed and retreated out of his dwelling. As soon as the door closed behind him, 3PO turned to the others worriedly. How do we know we can trust Granite? He asked. He could be lying about the last rebel faction on Rom. What if he's really an Imperial? After all, he has a force pike. I read him as sincere, 4BX said. R2 beeped agreement. I don't think we have a choice, Stewart said. We have to trust him. We can't stay here, 4BX pointed out. They all turned to 3PO. Oh, all right. 3PO agreed fretfully. We'll go with granite. But don't blame me if we get into another dreadful adventure. Experiments for your own world. 1. Hot air power. When Stewart and the droids escaped the desert in a balloon, they used rising hot air to get off the ground. Can you harness this power in your own room? Give this activity a spin to find out. Materials: notebook paper, pen, scissors, thread, heavier string won't work, paper clip, table lamp with a shade or desk lamp. It must have a regular incandescent bulb. A fluorescent bulb won't work. If you use a desk lamp, turn it upside down so that the bulb points up. 1. Trace the pattern on the next page on a notebook paper. 2. Cut along the curving line to make a spiral. 3. Use a pen to poke a small hole through the dot. Tie a piece of thread to a paper clip. Push the other end of the thread through the hole. Hold the thread so that the paper spiral dangles. 4. Close any open windows and turn off any fans. Hold the spiral over an unlit lamp. See diagram below. The spiral may turn for a minute if the thread is twisted. Wait until the spiral is still. 5. Turn on the lamp. Wait a few seconds. What happens? The lit bulb warms the air around it. That makes the air less dense than the other air in the room. The heated air rises, turning the spiral as it goes. 2. Mouth lightning. Crunch up some candy to create static electricity and make some mini lightning in your own mouth. Materials: wintergreen candy, like Winto Green Lifesavers. Dark room or closet. Mirror. 1. Read these directions ahead of time, because you're going to have to do this in the dark. 2. Go into an unlit room. Let your eyes get used to the dark. 3. Hold a mirror in front of your face. Put a wintergreen candy between your back teeth. Try to keep it as dry as possible. Bite down on it with your mouth open. Do you see any flashes of light in the mirror? When you bite into hard candy, your teeth crunch the sugar crystals inside. That makes static electricity, which causes sparks to fly. The sparks themselves aren't bright enough to see. However, they cause some gas molecules in the air to give off ultraviolet or UV light. The wintergreen flavoring in the candy absorbs the UV light. That makes the candy glow for a split second. 3. Balloon thunder. How does lightning make thunder? This balloon experiment is bursting with answers. Materials: 2 balloons. Use stretchy latex balloons. Shiny mylar balloons won't work. Water. Peen. 1. Blow up one balloon. Fill the other with water. 2. Hold the air-filled balloon away from you and pop it with a pin. Listen to the sound it makes. A balloon compresses the air inside it, squeezes it into a smaller space. When you pop your balloon, the air expanded again. Anytime air expands quickly, it makes a loud sound. Thunder works much the same way. As lightning streaks through the sky, it heats the air around it to more than 43,000 degrees Fahrenheit. As the air heats up, it expands super quickly, making the super loud sound we call thunder. 3. Hold the water-filled balloon over a sink and pop it with a pin. Listen to the sound it makes. A balloon can't compress water very much, so when you pop a water balloon, there isn't nearly as much sound. 4. Tornado in a jar. Twist up a tiny tornado that can fit in the palm of your hand. Materials: empty plastic jar with lid. It should be about the size of a peanut butter jar. Teaspoon. Dishwashing detergent. Vinegar. Food coloring. 1. Fill the empty jar 2/3 full of water. 2. Add 1 teaspoon dishwashing detergent. 3. Add 1 teaspoon vinegar. 4. Add 2 drops of food coloring. 5. Replace the lid and tighten it well. 6. Hold the jar from the bottom and swirl it around quickly a few times. Hold it up to a light. A brightly lit window or computer screen works well. Watch for a funnel-shaped cloud of bubbles. If you don't see one, swirl the jar again. The forces that created your tornado in a jar are much different than those that produce real tornadoes. However, a funnel-shaped cloud often appears in the center of a tornado. The tornado itself is an invisible tube of fast-whirling wind. You can't break Newton's laws. The third law of motion is known to Earth scientists as Newton's third law. Here's a rundown of all three of Newton's laws. Newton's first law of motion. If no outside forces act on a moving object, it will keep traveling in the same direction and at the same speed. If the object isn't moving at all, it will stay still. Forces include pushes, pulls, friction, and gravity. Almost every object on Earth is under the influence of some of these forces. But an object hurtling through space, far from any planets or stars, is free of them. Newton's second law of motion. When you apply a force to an object, its speed and/or direction changes. The change is determined by the amount of force and its direction. Even if you never heard of this law, you apply it with every move you make. For instance, anyone knows that the harder you hit a baseball, the faster it flies. And where your bat touches the ball helps determine whether you make a line drive or a pop foul. Newton's third law of motion. For every force, there is an equal force in the opposite direction. The birds and the V's. Many migrating Earth birds, like Canada geese, fly in V formation just like the birds of Planet X. Scientists think this gives them two advantages, but they aren't sure which is more important. Easier flying. As the lead goose flies, it creates an updraft behind each of its wings. Two geese fall in behind the lead bird to take advantage of the updrafts, which makes flying easier. Other geese could follow those two to take advantage of those birds' updrafts, and so on. Better communication. To avoid crashes, each goose needs to see the geese around it. Following in a V formation allows the birds to avoid each other's blind spots. See diagram on the next page. For seasons in one day, 4BX has good reason to doubt the existence of a planet with 4 seasons between sunrise and sunset. For a planet to circle its sun twice in 24 hours, it would have to orbit incredibly close to its sun. Temperatures would reach thousands of degrees Fahrenheit, way too hot for plants or animals to survive. Liquid water would boil away instantly. A planet that close to the sun would also experience tidal lock. The same side of the planet would always face the sun. That means there would be no day and night. Instead, half the planet would always have daylight while the other half was always in the dark. In our solar system, there is one planet that orbits the sun in less than a day, Venus. But a day on Venus is about 8 Earth months long. Remember, a planet's day is the time it takes to rotate once on its axis. Insulate this. Different animals use different kinds of insulation to keep themselves warm. Polar bears are so well adapted for staying warm that they're more likely to overheat than to get too chilly. Since fat makes a great insulator, seals and whales have a thick layer surrounding their bodies. The thick fat keeps their body heat from seeping into the cold ocean waters. Camels, on the other hand, have to endure hot desert days. They don't want a heat-keeping layer of fat, so they pile up their fat in a hump instead. The eye of the storm. On average, more people are killed by lightning in a year than by tornadoes and hurricanes put together. The safest place to be during a lightning storm is inside a house or other building with plumbing or electricity. Stay away from electrical appliances and running water. Hardtop cars and buses are also safe, especially if you sit away from the sides of the vehicle. However, a close lightning strike could cause an auto accident by damaging a car or startling a driver. So if you're caught on the road during a thunderstorm, it's safest to have the driver pull over until the storm passes. More people are struck by lightning just before and just after a thunderstorm than during the storm itself. If you see storm clouds approaching, head for safety. And don't head outside again until half an hour after the last lightning flash you see or the last rumbling of thunder you hear. Tornadoes produce the world's strongest winds. The greatest danger during a tornado is from objects being thrown around by the wind. The safest place to wait out a tornado is somewhere below ground. If no good shelter is available, try to get as low as possible, like in a ditch. 11.6.18.15.14.5-1